At 6:03 a.m., a security camera in a quiet suburb caught Robert Hoagland starting his morning walk. It was the last time anyone who knew him ever saw him again. His car was still in the driveway, and his wallet and keys were sitting on the counter. What happened in those moments after he stepped out of the camera's view is a question that doesn't just haunt his family, it haunts the very idea of safety we take for granted on our quiet, suburban streets. We like to think we're safe in our own homes, the trimmed lawns, the familiar faces. The predictable rhythm of life on a quiet street is all supposed to be a shield against the chaos of the outside world. We trust the people we wave to every morning, the ones who grab our mail when we're gone, the neighbors who live just a single wall away. But what happens when that trust is completely shattered? What happens when the person next door isn't who you think they are? And what happens when a neighbor just stops existing? Tonight, we're looking into 4 unsettling true stories that all unfold on these supposedly safe suburban streets. These aren't just creepy encounters or strange bumps in the night. These are stories about people who vanish seemingly into thin air from the very places they should have been the most secure. We'll get into the disturbing true crime details of cases that have baffled investigators for years, and we'll even touch on the eerie, sometimes paranormal theories that have sprung up in the silence they left behind. Because sometimes the scariest horror stories are the real ones that remind you that you never really know who is living right next door. Story 1. The man who walked out of his life. The story of Robert Hoagland is a chilling reminder that a person can just step out of their life as step out for a walk. Newtown, Connecticut, is the kind of idyllic town you see in movies, charming, historic, and almost painfully peaceful. It was here, in the Sandy Hook village of Newtown, that 50-year-old Robert Hoagland, a chef and property appraiser, lived a seemingly happy life with his family. He was a creature of habit, a reliable husband and father, a man so locked into his daily routine that when he suddenly broke from it, it felt like a tear in reality itself. July 28, 2013, began as a totally normal Sunday. Robert's wife, Lori, was out of the country, and he was spending the day with one of their sons. That morning, he stopped at a gas station to fill up his wife's car. Security footage caught him there, buying a gas can and a map of the United States. Looking back, that purchase seems heavy with meaning, but at the time, it was just another boring errand. Later that morning, he was outside mowing the lawn. His son saw him, and so did a neighbor one last. Casual sighting of a man doing the most ordinary suburban chore you can imagine. He shared a few words with his son, with the drone of the lawnmower as a soundtrack to a quiet Sunday. And then, he was just gone. Gone. When Monday morning rolled around, Robert didn't show up for work at a law firm in Bridgeport. That afternoon, he wasn't at the airport to pick up his wife, Lori, like he was supposed to. Panic started to creep in. Back at their house, everything was exactly where it should be. A silent monument to a life that had been abruptly paused. His car was in the driveway. His wallet, medication, and passport were all in the house. His keys were on the counter. The lawnmower was just sitting in the yard, as if he just stepped away for a minute, but he hadn't. The police were called, and an investigation started. But it was an investigation into nothing. There was no sign of a struggle, no hint of foul play, no note, and no explanation. It was a disappearance so clean, so absolute. It was as if he turned into a ghost. In the weeks that followed, the search for Robert Hoagland ramped up. The case was featured on Investigation Discovery's series Disappeared, which brought national attention to the mystery. Tips started coming in, but they painted a confusing and contradictory picture. There were alleged sightings in Rhode Island and Southern California, but none of them could ever be confirmed. Police looked at every possibility. They checked into the family's life, especially the struggles of one of his sons with drug addiction. Had Robert been confronted by someone from his son's past? Did he run into trouble, trying to protect his family? It was a theory, but there was no evidence. The idea that he'd simply chosen to walk away and start a new life was also on the table, but it seemed completely out of character for the devoted family man. His wife, Lori, insisted he would never, ever voluntarily abandon them. And yet, the purchase of that map hung over everything. Was it a clue he left on purpose, or was it just a meaningless coincidence? For almost a decade, the case went cold. The Hoagland family was left in a horrible limbo, unable to grieve and unable to move on. The quiet street in Sandy Hook held its breath, the empty house serving as a constant, silent reminder of the man who had vanished from it. The story became a local legend. The neighbor who saw him mowing the lawn that day was one of the last people to see him. A casual, everyday moment that was now charged with the weight of an unsolvable mystery. How could a man just disappear from the middle of his own yard without a sound? Then, in December 2022, 9.5 years after he vanished, the mystery was solved, but not in any way anyone expected. Police in Sullivan County, New York, about a 2-hour drive from Newtown War, called to an apartment in the small town of Rock Hill. A man had died. When they questioned his roommate, he gave the deceased's name as Richard King. But when deputies searched the apartment, they found paperwork with a very different name, Robert Hoagland. He hadn't been the victim of a crime. He wasn't suffering from amnesia. He had, for reasons we may never understand, just left. He had driven away from his home, his family, and his entire life, and started over with a new name. He'd been living quietly in that small New York town for years, working and making new friends, and none of them knew the truth about the man they called Richard King. His death was as quiet as his second life. He died of natural causes, alone in his apartment. The news sent a shockwave through his old community in Newtown. All the paranormal theories and fears of a dark conspiracy evaporated, replaced by a much more human and, in some ways, more disturbing reality. Robert Hoagland hadn't vanished because he was taken. He had vanished because he chose to be silent. The quiet suburban street wasn't the scene of a crime, but the launch pad for an escape. For his family, the news was a double-edged sword. It was the end of a decade of not knowing, but the beginning of a lifetime of unanswerable questions. Why? Why would a man with a seemingly happy life decide to just erase himself? The horror here isn't about monsters, but about the secrets people carry. It is a terrifying reminder that the person you wave to every day might be living a life so separate they can just choose to disappear, leaving behind nothing but the ghost of who they used to be. Story 2. The man who measured the lawns. We all know that neighbor, not the one who throws loud parties, but the stickler for the rules. The one who measures the height of your grass or complains if your trash can is visible from the road. The one who seems to enjoy being in charge of the tiny, petty rules of suburban life. In Park City, Kansas, that man was Dennis Rader, and for over 30 years, while he was busy handing out complaints for minor code violations, he was also hiding a secret so monstrous it would shatter the community's sense of safety forever. To most people, Dennis Rader was just a normal family man. He was a Cub Scout leader, president of his church council, a husband, and a father of 2. For a while, he worked installing a DT security systems, a job that gave him intimate knowledge of people's homes, their weak spots, and their schedules. Later, he became a compliance officer for Park City, a role he took to with a truly creepy level of enthusiasm. Neighbors remembered him as being aggressive and nitpicky, showing up unannounced and taking pictures of their property for supposed violations. One neighbor, Bill Lindsay, got multiple citations from Rader 1 for a pile of tree limbs and others. While he was working on his truck, Rader's presence was just unsettling. Bill's wife, Tina, said she always had an uneasy feeling about him, that he always seemed to be lurking and watching. She even noted her dog couldn't stand him. Another neighbor said he was someone who just got a kick out of using his limited power. He was, simply put, the creepy neighbor people put up with, but secretly wished would just go away. What they didn't know was that Rader's obsession with control went far beyond city rules. Starting in 1974, a serial killer began to terrorize the Wichita area. He called himself BTK for his method: bind, torture, kill. His first victims were the Otero family's Julie and their 2 young children, all brutally murdered in their home. Over the next 2 decades, the BTK killer would claim 10 lives, all while taunting the police and media with letters and cryptic clues. He described the murders in chilling detail, loving the fear he was creating. He once called the police to report one of his own murders. Another time, he sent a letter to a woman he'd stalked, but decided not to kill, just to let her know he'd been there. The whole city was on edge, terrified of the monster living among them. No one suspected he was the same guy handing out tickets for overgrown lawns. His two identities: Dennis Rader, the annoying but harmless compliance officer, and BTK, the sadistic killer, existed side by side. In 1985, those two worlds horrifically collided. Rader murdered one of his own neighbors, 53-year-old Maureen Hedge. He lived just down the street from her. He stalked her, learned her routine, and on April 27th he broke into her home and strangled her. He took her body to the Christ Lutheran Church, the same church where he was counseled President Tond, posed her in degrading positions, taking photos before dumping her body on the side of a road. His neighbors had no idea that one of their own had been a victim, and that the killer was still living among them, still waving as he drove by, still measuring their lawns. For 30 years, Rader managed to hide in plain sight. This is the real horror of his story. He wasn't some shadowy figure. He was the guy next door. The man who stalked Tina Lindsay's house while her husband was away wasn't just a creepy neighbor. He was a serial killer weighing his options. The uneasy feeling people had around him wasn't just a personality clash. It was instinct. A subconscious recognition of the predator hiding behind that boring, mundane mask. BTK went silent after his last known murder in 1991. For over a decade, Wichita breathed a little easier, hoping the nightmare was finally over. But Rader's ego was his downfall. In 2004, craving that old attention, he resurfaced, sending letters and packages to the media. This time, though, technology was different. In one message, he actually asked the police if he could be traced through a floppy disk. In a brilliant move, the police placed an ad in the newspaper saying it was safe. Rader took the bait. He sent a floppy disk to a local TV station. On that disk, metadata revealed the words Christ Lutheran Church and the name Dennis. The net that had been cast for 30 years was finally closing in. On February 25, 2005, Dennis Rader was arrested. The news was met with total disbelief. His neighbors, the people he had harassed for years over petty rules, were stunned. How could the man they knew be the monster that had haunted their city for 3 decades? Bill and Tina Lindsay felt a chilling, retroactive fear. All those times he'd been in their yard, the unease his wife felt when she was home alone, it was all cast in a new, terrifying light. During his confession, Rader described his crimes in cold, procedural detail, with zero remorse. He talked about his victims like they were projects. He admitted to killing 10 people, including his neighbor, Maureen Hedge. He was the ultimate neighbor from hell, a man who used the trust and anonymity of suburban life to hide his unspeakable evil. The story of Dennis Rader is a horrifying lesson in the masks people wear. It forces us to ask an uncomfortable question. How well do we really know the people living right beside us? The idea that a monster could be living next door, hiding behind a mask of total normalcy, is deeply unsettling. If these stories are sending a chill down your spine and you want to explore more mysteries lurking just beneath the surface of our everyday lives, take a second to subscribe and hit that notification bell. We have so many more dark stories to share from the shadows, and you won't want to miss what is coming next. Now, let's get back to the quiet streets, where our next mystery is waiting. Story 3. The Snapping Man. Not all horror stories come with police reports and case files. Some are passed down as whispers, as fragments of memory too strange to be believed, but too terrifying to be completely dismissed. They exist in that gray area between true crime and urban legend. This is one of those stories about a neighbor who wasn't just unsettling, but seemed to play by a whole different set of rules. A man who vanished not once, but over and over, whose presence was marked by a single, terrifying sound. This story comes from a sprawling, anonymous apartment complex, the kind with endless, identical hallways, where your neighbors are little more than familiar strangers. Tinaratora, a young woman named Chloe, had lived there for about a year and had gotten used to the building's rhythms. The distant sound of TVs, muffled arguments, the occasional late-night party. It was just the background noise of city life. Then, the apartment directly across the hall, which had been empty for months, suddenly had someone living in it. There was no moving truck, no noise, no activity. One day it was empty, the next it wasn't. The new neighbor was a man Chloe rarely saw, but every time she did, it was jarring. He was unnaturally tall and thin, and he moved in a way she described as jointed, like a puppet. He never made eye contact, never spoke, never even nodded in the hallway. He would just glide from his door to the elevator like a silent ghost. The only thing Chloe knew about him was what she could hear through the thin walls. Absolutely nothing. No music, no TV, no voices. Just a deep, unnerving silence. The first incident happened about a month after he moved in. Chloe was jolted awake around 3 a.m. by a sharp, loud sound from the hallway. It was a distinct snap, like someone snapping their fingers with incredible force. It was loud, sharp, and it only happened once. She got up and looked through her peephole, but the hallway was empty. She tried to brush it off as a weird building noise, but the sound was too clean, too deliberate. The next night, it happened again, 3 a.m. A single, powerful snap right outside her door. This became a nightly ritual. Every single night, between 3 o'clock and 3:15 a.m., the snap would echo through the hall. Chloe's anxieties skyrocketed. She started staying up, waiting for it, her heart pounding in the dark. She complained to the building manager, who just looked at her with a mix of pity and annoyance. No one else had reported anything. He said it was probably the pipes. But Chloe knew it wasn't the pipes. The sound felt organic, intentional. It was the sound of a presence. One night, fed up and terrified, she decided she was going to open the door the second she heard it. She sat by the door, hand on the knob, just waiting. The clock ticked past 3 a.m. The building was dead silent. Then, snap. It was so close, so loud, it made her jump. She yanked the door open. The hallway was empty, but at the far end, by the emergency exit, she saw him or her neighbor. He was standing perfectly still with his back to her. Before she could even think to call out, he turned his head, not his body, just his head at an angle that looked completely unnatural. He was looking right at her, and then he just vanished. He didn't run. He didn't fade away. He was there 1 second and gone the next, like a light being switched off. The emergency exit door never moved. After that night, the snapping stopped, but the silence from his apartment felt heavier, more menacing. A week later, Chloe came home from work and found an eviction notice taped to her neighbor's door. He hadn't paid rent in 3 months, which was impossible, since he'd only moved in 2 months ago. The building manager, looking confused and angry, let himself into the apartment with a master key. Chloe watched from her doorway as he stepped inside. The apartment was completely, utterly empty. No furniture, no clothes, no food in the fridge. It was as if no one had ever lived there at all. The only thing they found was a thick layer of dust on every single surface, the kind that takes years to build up, not months. The building manager was baffled, muttering about squatters and con artists. But Chloe knew it was more than that. The man had been real. The sound had been real. He had vanished, leaving behind not a single trace. And this is where the story goes from strange to truly paranormal. A few nights later, Chloe was talking to an elderly woman who'd lived in the building for over 30 years. She mentioned the strange man and the empty apartment. The old woman's face went pale. She told Chloe this wasn't the first time. Every few years, she said, someone moves into that apartment. They never stay long, and they're always followed by stories of strange noises in the night. Then she leaned in and whispered a warning that had been passed down among the long-term residents for years. You hear the snapping man, you don't look. You never, ever look. According to the building's lore, the entity they called the snapping man was a kind of harbinger. The snapping sound was a test, a lure. If you acknowledged it, if you looked, you invited it to notice you. The people who had vanished from the building over the years, the ones who disappeared without a sound, were always the ones who got obsessed with the strange noises, ones who couldn't resist looking. Chloe moved out a month later. This story has no neat conclusion, no police filer. It exists only in the terrified stories of tenants and the chilling folklore of a single, unremarkable apartment building. It's a neighbor horror story where the threat isn't a person, but something else entirely. Something that can't be arrested or evicted. It just is. And sometimes, it vanishes. Just waiting for the next person who dares to look when they hear it snap. Story 4. The House of Rotting Secrets, Imperial Avenue in Cleveland, Ohio, was a neighborhood on the edge. It was a place of crowded, older houses, many of them boarded up and forgotten. This was a community struggling with poverty and crime, a place where people learned to mind their own business. It was on this street that Anthony Sowell lived, in a 3-story house with neat white siding that seemed out of place. To his neighbors, Sowell was a familiar face. He was a registered sex offender, a fact people knew but often overlooked in a place where plenty of people had a past. He sold scrap metal and was often friendly, even offering free barbecue to people on the street. But for years, a foul stench came from his house, a smell so powerful and disturbing that it was a constant source of complaint. Neighbors said it smelled like a dead body. They tried to explain it away, blaming the sausage shop next door or a gas leak. The reality was far more horrific than anything they could have imagined. The nightmare began to unravel on October 29, 2009. A woman went to the police with a terrifying story. She had been to Anthony Sowell's house, where he had attacked and raped her. Based on her report, police got a warrant and went to 12,205 Imperial Avenue. Sowell wasn't home, so they went inside. On the 3rd floor, they made the first gruesome discovery. They found the decomposing bodies of 2 women. What followed was the excavation of a house of horrors that would shock the entire country. As police kept searching the property, the body count grew. They found more remains in the living room, hidden in crawl spaces, and buried in shallow graves in the backyard. The neat house with the white siding was a tomb. That foul stench that had plagued the neighborhood for years wasn't from sausage or natural gas. It was the smell of death, the smell of Sowell's victims. In total, the remains of 11 women were recovered from Anthony Sowell's property. The victims were all black women from the neighborhood, many of whom struggled with addiction. They were vulnerable, the kind of people whose disappearance might not immediately trigger alarms. Their families had reported them missing, but their pleas for help were often brushed off. The mother of one victim, Tonya Carmichael, said that when she reported her daughter missing, the police told her to just go home, that her daughter would probably show up when she ran out of drug money. Sowell had exploited their vulnerability, luring them to his home with the promise of a drink or drugs, only to strangle them and then live with their bodies for weeks, sometimes months. The neighbors were horrified. The man who shared barbecue with them, the man they saw every single day, was a monster. His girlfriend, who had lived with him for a time, remembered smelling the decay and being told it was either his stepmother downstairs or the sausage shop next door. The signs had been there all along, but they were explained away. The horror wasn't just in the murders, but in the chilling realization of how close they had all been to this evil Sharenga street. A conversation, a friendly wave, while just feet away, a house was slowly filling up with the dead. During his trial, survivor testimony painted a terrifying picture. Vanessa Gay, who gave the court permission to use her name, described meeting Sowell and going back to his house. The moment she stepped inside, she said, she was certain he was going to kill her. He led her to the 3rd floor, where he raped and strangled her until she passed out. She survived, but her testimony gave a chilling glimpse into the terror his victims felt in their final moments. Anthony Sowell was convicted of murdering 11 women and sentenced to death. He died in prison in 2021 from a terminal illness. After his conviction, the city of Cleveland demolished the house on Imperial Avenue, hoping to erase the physical scar from the neighborhood. But the psychological scar is still there. The case of the Cleveland Strangler is a brutal story about a predator who hid in plain sight, preying on the most vulnerable people in his own community. These women didn't vanish without a sound because they were taken somewhere far away. They vanished inside their own neighborhood, inside a neighbor's house. The horror of Imperial Avenue is a stark reminder that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones who know our names, who live on our street, and who smile while hiding a graveyard in their own backyard. The quiet streets of suburbia are supposed to feel safe, orderly. But as these stories show, that feeling of safety is terrifyingly fragile. A man can be mowing his lawn 1 minute and walk out of his life the next. A rule-obsessed compliance officer can spend his days writing citations, and his nights as a sadistic killer. An apartment can have a tenant who isn't entirely human, whose presence is a warning. And a friendly man offering barbecue can be hiding unimaginable horrors right under the noses of an entire community. These 4 stories, each in its own way, tear apart our sense of security. They prove that the greatest threats don't always come from some dark, isolated place. Sometimes they're on the other side of a shared wall, a friendly fence, or a simple good morning. They force us to confront the unsettling fact that we can never truly know the secrets hidden behind our neighbors' closed doors. The people in these stories didn't just vanish. They were erased, swallowed by the very places that were supposed to keep them safe. So it leaves us with an uncomfortable question, which is the most terrifying possibility. The monster who looks just like us, the ghost that breaks all the rules of reality, or the ordinary person who simply decides to become a ghost, leaving nothing but a void where a life used to be. Let me know what you think in the comments. Thank you for joining me in the shadows tonight. If you found these stories as chilling as I did, please like this video and subscribe for more explorations into the dark and the unknown. Stay safe, and remember, you never really know who you're living next to.